Of the dozens of haunted location stories people tell in North Carolina, today's story is one of the very few where the legend isn't even the most unsettling part. Now, there is not any graphic footage or images included. However, there is a very disturbing confession tied to a real place that you can still visit today, a nearly perfect 40-foot circle in the woods of Chatham County where vegetation refuses to grow, and where people swear objects placed inside don't stay put until morning. And what happened there is the kind of thing that makes you wonder if a place can absorb darkness. In the early 1970s, Chatham County, North Carolina was the kind of place where the woods felt like they went on forever, and most people measured distance by how many minutes it took down a two-lane road rather than by miles. The closest big reference point for many locals was Siler City, and even that was still small enough that if you did something foolish on a Friday night, you could expect someone's aunt to hear about it before breakfast on Saturday. And so when 28-year-old Marilyn Lynn Carter settled into the rhythm of life there, she wasn't chasing excitement. She was chasing stability. Lynn was the kind of person who kept her car clean, who packed her lunch the night before, and who always had a spare house key hidden in a place only she and her sister knew about. She worked days. She helped family when she could, and she had this habit of humming softly while she did chores, like the noise filled up any empty space that worry might otherwise crawl into. Lynn's younger sister, Deborah Carter, was 22 at the time, and Deborah adored her. Not in the dramatic way you see in movies, but in this quiet, constant way. Like Lynn was the person who made the world feel navigable. Deborah later told friends that if Lynn said, "It'll be fine," she believed it, because Lynn didn't say things like that unless she meant them. Now, Lynn also had a boyfriend, Raymond Ray Talley, 30 years old, who lived close enough that dropping by unannounced wasn't strange at all. It was normal. Ray was friendly in public, the kind of man who could laugh with a cashier and ask about their day, and so on the outside, he looked like the safe choice. But the people closest to Lynn knew she'd started doing something subtle in the weeks leading up to this story. She stopped talking about the future with the same ease. When Deborah asked about plans, holidays, moving in together, anything, Lynn would answer, but she'd do it like she was choosing words carefully, like she didn't want to trigger an argument she didn't have the energy to fight. And so by the time late summer rolled around, Lynn had two realities running at once. One was the visible one: work, family, routine, the normal small-town life. And the other was the private one, this growing sense that something in her life had shifted, and she wasn't sure how to shift it back. And this matters, because when Lynn disappeared, the first question wasn't, "Could something terrible happen here?" The first question was, what changed? On a weekday morning, early enough that the air still had that cool, damp feel it gets in the Carolina woods, Deborah tried calling Lynn before heading out, just to sync up about a family errand later. Lynn didn't answer, which wasn't unheard of, but it was unusual enough that Deborah tried again during her lunch break. Still nothing. And so after work, Deborah drove to Lynn's place. The porch looked normal. The yard looked normal. But when Deborah stepped up to the front door, she noticed a detail that made her stop short. The door wasn't locked. Now, that might not sound like much, but you need to remember, Lynn was careful to the point of being predictable. She locked her door the same way she buckled a seatbelt, automatically without thinking. And Deborah knew that because Lynn used to tease her for forgetting. Deborah called Lynn's name as she pushed the door open, and the house answered back with silence. Lynn's purse wasn't where it usually sat. One of her shoes was near the couch, like she'd kicked it off mid-step. And the strangest thing was that it didn't look like a burglary. It looked like an interruption, like Lynn had been in the middle of being Lynn, and then something had cut right through her routine. Deborah backed out and went straight to the people she trusted most. Family first, then law enforcement. In a small county, news doesn't travel. It spreads, and by that evening, the people who cared about Lynn were doing the same handful of frantic things people always do at the start of a disappearance: calling friends, driving familiar roads, checking places that made no sense but still had to be checked. But as it would turn out, the most important detail wasn't inside Lynn's house at all. It was a place about 10 miles from Siler City in western Chatham County, down a lonely road in the woods near the Harper's Crossroads area, an infamous, nearly perfect circle of bare earth about 40 feet across where locals said nothing would grow, a place known as the Devil's Tramping Ground. If you asked people in Chatham County about the Devil's Tramping Ground, you wouldn't get one story, you'd get a dozen. Some would tell you, very matter-of-factly, that the devil himself walked that circle at night, pacing and thinking up new ways to cause trouble, and that his constant tramping was why the path stayed bare. Others would tell you that if you left objects inside the circle, sticks, bottles, even tents, those objects would be moved by morning, like the ground didn't want anything resting there. And so for decades it lived in that category of local weirdness that people used to scare teenagers or entertain out-of-towners. But investigators don't get to file things away as local weirdness, not when a real person is missing. In Lynn Carter's case, the initial search efforts were wide and exhausting. People walked tree lines. They checked ditches. They talked to anyone who might have seen her car. And, naturally, attention turned to Ray Talley, because when someone disappears, you start with the closest orbit. Ray told a version of events that sounded plausible on the surface. He'd seen her recently. She seemed fine. He didn't know where she'd go. Maybe she left town. It wasn't a confession. It wasn't a meltdown. It was a calm denial, delivered by a man who understood how to appear cooperative. And in the early stage of any investigation, that matters, because law enforcement can't just go on vibes. They need inconsistencies, corroboration, something they can put pressure on. But that wasn't even the worst of this situation, because as days turned into weeks, the case started to acquire that special kind of dread that only missing person cases have. There's no scene to process, no clear timeline, no finality. There's just a growing sense that the longer a person is gone, the more likely it is that the story ends in one specific way. And then there was a break. But it didn't come from a dramatic discovery in the woods, and it didn't come from a sudden witness stepping forward. It came later, when Ray Talley was picked up on an unrelated matter and found himself in a position where the world suddenly felt smaller. People like to imagine confessions as emotional, as if guilt forces truth out like steam from a kettle. But a lot of the time, confessions come out for uglier reasons: bargaining, control, ego, or the desire to shape how you'll be remembered. And so, after hours of questions and long silences, Ray did something investigators have seen countless times, but it's still chilling every time it happens. He offered a story, but only on his terms. He claimed Lynn was dead, and he claimed he could prove it. But he didn't start by naming a gravesite on a map like a normal person would. He didn't say, "She's in this field," or "She's by this bridge." Instead, he started talking about a place everyone in Chatham County had heard about, and plenty of people had visited as a dare. A perfect circle in the woods where nothing grows. A place people said even animals avoided. And when investigators realized Ray wasn't just referencing it for drama, that he was talking about it like he had a personal relationship with it, something in the case shifted. Because it would turn out, Ray wasn't just a man trying to hide a crime. He was a man trying to hide a crime inside a legend, like folklore could act as camouflage. Ray told them he chose the Devil's Tramping Ground because he'd heard the same stories everyone else had heard, that nothing stayed there, that nothing grew there, that the earth itself seemed to reject the place. And so, in his mind, it was perfect. He described driving down Devil's Tramping Ground Road at night, with the kind of confidence you only get when you think the world is built to accommodate your worst impulses. He described the woods pressing in on both sides, the road getting darker, the air changing as the trees thickened, until the headlights finally cut across the clearing and revealed it, this unnaturally clean ring of bare ground surrounded by healthy forest. Now, if you've never seen the site, what makes it unsettling isn't that it's a crater or a pit or anything dramatic. It's that it looks like someone took a compass and drew a circle, and then erased life inside it. According to NCpedia, it's a foot-wide bare path forming a perfect circle 40 feet in diameter, and vegetation around it is normal, while the path itself stays barren. Ray claimed that was the point. He said that if people ever went looking, if anyone ever suspected him, this would be the last place they'd want to dig, because it didn't feel like part of the normal world. And he reportedly framed it in a way that was as theatrical as it was sick, implying that even the earth rejects evil here. And then he told them what he buried there. Not just evidence, not just something, but proof that Lynn Carter's life had ended, and that it ended because he decided it would. The legend wasn't the horror. The horror was a human being choosing a myth as a hiding place, like superstition could serve as a lock. And so investigators went to that circle in the woods, and they searched it like it was any other crime scene, because at the end of the day, folklore doesn't stop shovels, and it doesn't stop dogs, and it doesn't stop a truth that's been waiting years to be found. Once Ray Talley's story collapsed into specifics, places, timelines, physical details, his calm denial no longer mattered. From that point forward, the case wasn't about whether Lynn Carter had simply vanished. It was about proving what he'd done and where he'd tried to hide it. And regardless of what you believe about the devil's tramping ground, whether you think it's just a strange patch of sterile soil, whether you buy the old salt content explanations noted by NC sources, or whether you think it's nothing more than a heavily trampled party spot that stayed bare because people kept it that way, the site still has this reputation as a place that doesn't let things rest. And maybe that's why the detail people remember isn't just the circle itself. It's the idea that someone tried to tuck a real crime inside a local legend, and for a while it worked. Because when a place already feels cursed, people stop asking normal questions about it. But Lynn Carter was a real person, with a real family, and a real life that had nothing to do with any devil. And the most haunting part of this story is that the circle in the woods didn't create the evil people whispered about. It just gave it a place to hide,